Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do another Cosmere controversy. This one again is about Jasnah, but specifically in context of Wind and Truth. So this video is going to contain full spoilers for Wind and Truth, the fifth book in the Stormlight Archive. So with that being said, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and if you're interested in supporting the channel in another way, you can check out the Patreon. Link is in the description. So with that being said, let's begin. All right, so this is a Cosmere controversy because I've noticed that a lot of people's opinions about this part of the book are not the same as mine. So it's very, very interesting. So the part in which I'm specifically talking about, it's full spoilers for Wind and Truth, but it is the debate between Terravodium and Jasnah, and basically in relation to Finn, when it should have been the entire argument should have been different, quite frankly. But I thought that was really, really good. I thought it was one of the best parts of the book. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it informs so much about Yasna's character, considering we don't have that much in-depth understanding of her personally. Like, we just understand her in context of how other people see her. So I think we got a lot of interesting context about the way she works, like mentally, about the fundamentals of who she is. And I think the scene itself promises an incredible story arc for her in the back five. Specifically a character arc, not even just a story arc, but her character arc in the back five, I think is going to be awesome. So let's talk in a little bit of detail about the debate. First thing I noticed about the debate is that essentially the topics that were brought up is kind of surface level intro to philosophy to a degree. So it's very surface level understanding of utilitarianism, and it's kind of basically that is the core framework of Yasna's morality. And because of that concept, Taravangian was essentially able to prove, based on that philosophy alone, that it would be in Finn's best interest to side with him. Because, quite frankly, based on that, framework, that's true. That's a true statement. So Taravangian essentially found a way to fool's mate Jasnah in a way that a lot of people seem to think that she would have been far more capable of counteracting and kind of seeing before it happened, and preemptively like switching the whole situation. But I'm not that surprised that she wasn't able to. So essentially, the conversation goes in a completely different direction than she was expecting. She stayed up all night preparing all sorts of political debates and all sort of reasonings and stuff that he would basically try to use in order to get Finn to join, I guess, his coalition, his new empire or whatever, and so all of those different things that she should have considered, and all these different ideas and stuff that she had while she was staying up all night trying to essentially preempt, to try to assume or to discover what type of tactics Taravangian would use, what type of arguments he would make, and she was trying to basically research counter arguments and stuff like that. So I think the way in which she enters this entire situation is very similar to how Dalinar enters most situations. Dalinar has an issue of thinking that he needs to be the one to do everything. He needs to be the frontline soldier, which, it's indicative of the way he was brought up in the life that he's had, so it makes sense. But he also thinks his idea is ultimately the best one, and that he is ultimately the strongest to kind of achieve a goal. Like, he ultimately thinks he's the best candidate for any situation in most every scenario. Even when it got into the political minutia and stuff of it, he basically learned how to be a better politician so he could still be the front runner, so he could still be the one to do all the things, to, be the leader of all of it. And to a degree, that's a huge flaw. Granted, he's managed to stumble his way through it and kind of has done it more or less successfully. But ultimately, like, this is kind of not a good, it's not a good character trait. He needs to understand how to delegate in order to basically, what's the word I'm looking for, to integrate more information and more ideas and stuff from other people. But he's so gung-ho about his way is the right way and he sees it the best way and stuff that, like, he kind of ignores that stuff. He doesn't even do it intentionally. And Jasnah does the same thing. Jasnah is so used to being considered the most intelligent person around. She's, like, considered a master scholar and stuff like that. And people think she's, smartest person of a generation and stuff. And I think a lot of that perception has sank into her. A lot of it is essentially a result of the way her heresy, her atheism, is basically treated in their culture. So as a result, her defense mechanism is basically tied around her own intelligence. So the fact that she's always been smart, has always shown herself to be smart, means that people kind of automatically assume she's smart. So therefore, her arguments have never really needed to be that strong. The strength of her arguments are purely based on her being right. So when she wants to be right, she will go in harder detail and like further explain to you why she's right. And the thing about it is, a lot of the topics and stuff that she chooses to be knowledgeable about, that she goes in depth with, she turns out to be right because the amount of research and stuff she would do in these very specific areas. So there are certain pragmatic things and stuff that like she kind of, she sees it as a very black and white kind of logic option, and therefore like because of that she considers it to be absolutely correct, and then will basically be dogged about anybody else's opinion. So the example of that that comes to mind immediately is her interaction with Kaladin. So her first suggestion is to find one of the heralds and kill them. And it makes sense that that would be her perspective, because she's a Italian. She understands the present day and context of history. So if it happened in the past, or if a similar situation happened in the past, she will of course use that to be her jump off point. So she will basically use that, like say, okay, if this worked back then, let's try it again. Or if it's not going to work the same way, let's try a modification on it and stuff. So she very much is very much about kind of retreading trod ground a lot. She is very much into, improving it, but she is very much, a fan of repeating the past because that's how she sees the world. When that's not always a good option. That's not always the best plan. There are things that happen in the past that have echoes of no, there are things that are happening in the present that have echoes of things in the past, but they're not the same thing. They shouldn't be treated the same way. You need to take the lessons of the past and apply those lessons to the situations of the present. You can't look at the past as these events and say that they're a carbon copy of what's happening in the present and treat it the exact same way. That is one of the main issues I've seen with Jasnah's character. She essentially does that. That is essentially how she sees application of lessons from the past to apply them to the present. And that's kind of why she went into this debate thinking it was probably going to be along the lines of something, that she's probably dealt with before, other political arguments and stuff that she's dealt with before. So she didn't even think about the fact that Taravangian's angle could basically be just the most surface level, bare bones framework of her own morality. Because the nature of who she is, her position in life as a princess, as an Alethi, as, a powerful person in a powerful family in the most powerful country, she's never really had to question her morality. So the ability to basically say, my family, then my kingdom, then my country, then everybody else, that is essentially a place of privilege. She's been able to kind of live that life and like exist in that way for, her entire existence. And a lot of people around her have lived in that same way. So that's her basic moral framework. And I think what's interesting, that is essentially everyone's basic moral framework. That's morality is essentially relative, but that is basically probably the closest you can get to a universal morality for most people. And it seems so obvious, but it doesn't like, to somebody who basically lives in that existence and that concept and has never had it questioned and never seen it as negative, because even if you ask someone else that in a different country, they'll have similar moral framework. So therefore it being the same means it can't be, a bad thing. So there's never been an instance of questioning that kind of morality. There's never been a question or an instance of, how does that extend when you have an ally, when you're trying to create a larger alliance and stuff? How does that hold up? So that's never been questioned. It's never been tested. So to put her in a situation where she's a part of this coalition, where she has different allies and stuff, and then to basically fabricate this framework where you would have to basically choose between her priorities and the priorities of everyone else, it essentially boils down to her moral framework is it starts with her family, her kingdom, her country. So it kind of goes in that direction. And her actions her entire life has essentially been that. So the way in which she treats Aesudan with having a backup assassin and stuff, to me that is very much like Dalinar beating up Elhokar. Because instead of Dalinar talking to Elhokar and like trying to see why he had these paranoia issues and all this kind of stuff, and probably trying to, pry out the information from him about the cryptics and all this other kind of stuff and get some actual proper explanation. Granted, I know that wouldn't be easy because Elhokar was not very forthcoming with his emotions or anything like that. It would have been a difficult conversation, probably have to take a lot of conversations to get that information, but that would have been a better method versus basically scaring him to death. Like, so because if you notice from then on in, like Elhokar kind of, he defers to Dalinar. He kind of behaves in this way where he kind of, he essentially names Dalinar High King at that point because he is essentially afraid of him. He's not explicitly afraid of him, but there is definitely a spine of fear that still exists in there. Even though he's trying to beat the lesson into him that he cares about him, that lesson definitely isn't going to be learned through abuse. So that same kind of action to me is basically the same kind of thing that Jasnah does with the lesson, that she teaches Shallan in Way of Kings. When she just goes directly after the people that were cut purses and stuff and she just kills them, instead of using her power that she has in the city in any other way, she just tries to go and just like herself and just kind of go to the root of the problem as she sees it and cuts it off. It makes a very permanent kind of decision killing those people. She makes mention of the fact that the policing force in Kharbranth at that time was corrupt and Taravangian wasn't doing much about it and other people were like taking advantage of him and stuff. But the fact that she was there and had authority as an Alethi princess and just is who she is, she could have also helped him enforce greater change. She didn't even try to do that. She just went ahead and went and killed them, trying to do him a favor, or seeing it as doing him a favor, which, I mean, ultimately it was, but the way in which she went about it could have been a lot better. She could have even got a writ of execution the same way Nail and the Skybreakers constantly do. She could have just talked to Taravangian and been like, this will help your situation and blah, blah, blah. You should give me the right to do this, blah, blah, blah. So instead of just assuming the right to do that based on being a princess and stuff, she could have gone about it a legal way and it would have been a lot less, icky morally for like Shallan and stuff. So there's multiple ways she could have done it, but similar to Dalinar, she's very stubborn and kind of pig-headed and just kind of moved along with it, thinking her way is right, her way is the best way to do it, and just go ahead and do it. So that has essentially been her framework, her makeup for most of her life. So you get into the situation where you're actually confronted with your own morality and stuff, and you actually have to test it, but you kind of end up in this situation where you learn more about yourself, but she's learning about herself at the same time she's being manipulated. So this is another thing that I noticed that kind of gave greater context to Jasnah as a character and made me realize she's not this next level in intellect that people seem to think she is. The fact that she couldn't even really recover from the realization that her own moral framework as a utilitarian is a sham, essentially. I mean, she is a utilitarian, but there's a lot more nuance to it as it is expressed through her. There is a lot more nuance to it than the way this argument kind of frames it as. So the way in which she just kind of has this kind of shocking realization is just left dumbstruck, like tells me her morals have never been tested. She's never gone up against anything to challenge her in any real way. So that's why I think she was stun locked like that, because if she was the intellect that a lot of people perceive her to be, she would have been able to take that, twist it around, and remind Finn and Taravangian essentially this conversation is not about her. It's not about her moral framework. She has already proven herself to the alliance that she's a part of. Like the entire thing, like that entire hypothetical that he wins on is entirely moot, because she's basically already proven time and time again that that's not exactly what she would do. She gets to the point where she will learn and will do other things and stuff and will reconsider and given time and that kind of stuff. So even like with the having Aesodan potentially assassinated, she changed her mind from assassinating her to essentially having her watched, even though that entire action in and of itself, instead of consulting other people or talking to other people about her concerns and stuff, she just kind of went with this very permanent kind of solution she had in her back pocket. So again, that's another example of her doing these things very much in a way that Dalinar would. So instead of like her actually kind of getting a second opinion, essentially she just kind of goes straight forward and just immediately goes pig-headed towards it. And that's kind of how he traps her in the conversation. Early on, she's doing really good, seeing his plays and counteracting them, seeing these plays and counteracting them, realizing that all the research she did over the, staying up all night, which is stupid in and of itself, like you need mental rest and that kind of thing. So that was just stupid. But, so that entire thing, I feel like the fact that she had been up all night, the fact she had prepped all these other wrong plans and stuff is the thing that led to her being able to be trapped the way she was. She was essentially set up. So the few arguments and stuff, she gets a head nod from Taravangian and stuff like that, get another head nod and all this kind of stuff. what I kind of noticed too with those head nods, she was almost appreciative of those head nods because she was taking it as this very academic kind of studious back and forth kind of a thing, where she was almost she almost let her guard down essentially by him doing those head nods and things. She thought he was basically capitulating a little bit, and then the conversation kept getting off, and then she basically redirected it, and then basically correcting the focus of the conversation, and then he brought it back to her again. So instead of her recorrecting again and saying this shouldn't be about this topic you're trying to make it about, it should be about something else, instead of her doing that again, she gets drawn into it, and then she gets to a point, he kind of makes some statements that draws her to the place where she needs to make a point. She needs to kind of get this idea out because he misconstrued something else, which I believe he did purposely. He misconstrued something that made her basically go off on a tangent, and she starts talking, she starts rambling, basically going to her default places with her default arguments, which is a basic utilitarian argument. So when she goes to that place and makes that same basic argument, she proves Taravangian right, and she immediately loses the argument. So she gets to the point where she thinks she's going to be able to continue that line of thought, and it's going to be some kind of brilliant nuance that basically says Finn should stay with them and all this stuff while proving him wrong. But in effect, when she just kind of speaks extemporaneously, she just kind of proves him right. So that's kind of how it works. So I think it's a really fascinating situation, and that's why it kind of had me shook, because it feels like such a complete and total breakdown of Jasnah's character. Like, we kind of understand a lot of the history of her intellect and stuff is very much perception. She's very smart. Don't get me wrong. She is very smart. She definitely is one of the smartest people, you know, especially now. She's one of the smartest people around and stuff, and probably one of the smartest single planet, you know, intellects that we have in the Cosmere. But she's not infallible. She's not Brainiac 5 or something from Justice League. You know, she's not some, you know, she's not divinely intelligent. And I feel like Taravangian completely played her like a fiddle, because him being able to think on multiple levels, probably thought through all those different political arguments and stuff, and then came back around to her character flaw. Like, the way to win this argument is to expose and to keep hammering her character flaw. So that's kind of essentially what he did. So the way in which Jasnah basically loses the argument makes sense to me. The fact that the entire philosophical part of it is very surface level makes sense to me. Not only just because Brandon has this very basic kind of writing style where he doesn't like to hyper embed things. He will get subtle about some stuff here and there, but he doesn't, like, some of these stuff, a lot of like the mental health conversations and stuff, he's very just explicit. Like, to me, especially with the therapy stuff, it feels like it sounds textbook because the textbooks don't exist yet. So somebody has to have had those thoughts in a way that we would recognize them as textbook basic surface level in order for those things to exist, you know? So Kholin is essentially inventing therapy. That's why a lot of it sounds very basic therapy to us, because he's inventing it, and it just happens to be getting invented in a way that we can kind of recognize. Granted, there's probably multiple other ways you can do that that's more subtle and stuff like that, in the ways that, you know, people's pretentious nature would appreciate more. But I don't know. I feel like I kind of understand it from the context of you're basically making blockbuster books. So you're not trying to be like Asimov. You're not, you know, trying to be the most, you know, hide the themes and hide the message. You literally have to have a book club, sit down and dissect these characters to understand the nuance. That's why I think Brandon is like explicitly not going in that direction. That's why I think the debate between these two characters, like, even though you have someone that is essentially a genius and you have someone with divine intellect, it's near impossible to write that, especially when you're not an actual genius yourself, and you definitely are not a divine intelligence. So, like, it's impossible to write that to that level. So you have to find a way in which to connect it and bring it down to the ground, which is why I think he chose this character part. And it's also obviously a huge setup for the back half for Jasnah to have this great character arc. So I just really enjoyed it. So that's my quick ramble. I saw a lot of people with like negative opinions of it. Granted, my entire explanation might just sound like absolute hogwash to them, and it probably does. But like, that's kind of how I read it. And I will just say this. Me skipping all the preview chapters and ignoring any and all information about this book up until release has paid off. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't have any of the real issues I had like I did with Rhythm of War. But of course, there will always be, you know, criticisms and stuff. Brandon is not perfect. His writing is not perfect. So there will always be controversies and issues and stuff that there's worth talking about. So as I continue to let this book digest, let me think of some other stuff that'll be worth supplemental videos. videos. But this one, of course, had to be my first supplemental video because I love that part of the book so very much. The next one, we're probably going to talk about Shallan, because Shallan is just, everything around her and about her is more interesting than Shallan herself. So we're going to talk about that probably next time on another Cosmere controversy. So yeah, with that being said, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of that debate? Did you think that it was overly surface level? Did you think Jasnah was basically made to look dumb? What do you think about that entire debate? Let me know about that in the comments down below. And of course, again, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're interested, check out the Patreon. The link is in the description. And I will talk to y'all next time. Peace.